Much. Chair now recognizes Mr. DeVore for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ranking Member Stansbury. I think it's important to note that as the COVID-19 triggered a recession, it was, in fact, a very short and sharp recession due to the fact that it was government-imposed lockdowns that caused the loss in labor. In the period of time from the recession to the inauguration of the Biden-Harris administration, though, 57% of those pandemic jobs that were lost were recovered. It took another 17 months, though, to return to the same level of employment that had been the case just before the onset of COVID. Now, with all that federal money being spent, the question might be, why did it take 17 months? For gosh sakes, that's a long time. One reason is likely the collapse of what has been known as the multiplier effect. That's an economic theory that says that when the federal government spends money or, quote, invests in the economy, that those investments result in a multiple of dollars being returned back to the economy, as might happen with real investments. Unfortunately, as we've now accumulated some $35 trillion in federal debt, the multiplier effect has been declining. During the Great Recession era of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, that would be clear back in 2009, almost halcyon times by comparison to today, the multiplier effect at that time for that government spending was estimated to be about 60 cents on the dollar. In other words, you were 40 cents underwater. The most recent expenditures, for example, with the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, the multiplier effect is likely collapsed to 20 cents on the dollar, meaning a lot of that money is being wasted. And as a result, the investments really function to change the economy. We saw that when President Biden just a couple of weeks ago admitted that the Inflation Reduction Act had little to do with reducing inflation and everything to do with transitioning the economy from hydrocarbons to electricity for the purposes of climate change. Now, I've got perhaps some advanced warning or experience with this because, like Mr. Khanna, I'm originally from California. In fact, I served in the legislature there for 6 years before being termed out, and then, I think wisely, moving to Texas in 2011. While I was a state legislator, I voted no a lot, and I voted no on the very items that, of course, passed the legislature back then and have been kind of mirrored in federal policy since. So it's like a preview of coming attractions, and of course, this is somewhat due to, as we refer to the states sometimes as laboratories of democracy, and for better or for worse, California is often at the very leading edge of developing these new ideas. And we can kind of see from the record how that's affected Californians. So, for example, the U.S. Census Bureau, since 2009, has published the Supplemental Measure of Poverty. It takes into account the cost of living, non-cash benefits, et cetera. California, ever since this new measure was rolled out, has always had the nation's highest poverty rate. The other thing that I think is important to understand is the regulatory burden in California. We passed a measure back when I was in office, one of the things I did vote for, that looked at the regulatory compliance cost in California for California-based regulations. What we found is that in inflation-adjusted terms today, it would be worth more than $200,000 per small business simply to comply with regulations. It's important to note then, though, that at the time, federal regulations were estimated to be, at about $1.1 trillion in compliance costs, meaning that the Biden-Harris regulatory regime more than doubled the amount of regulations that were on the books just before the Great Recession. I think it's also important to understand that energy plays a big role in this. California has seen their energy costs go from the 8th highest in the nation to now the 2nd highest in the nation, only behind Hawaii. And there's reasons for this. It's California's aggressive push for electrifying their economy. It comes at a great cost to California workers and to the very high cost of living in California. And unfortunately, I think that we are going down the same path today. And then lastly, I think it's important to note that some people who look at the Biden-Harris record like to point to total payroll growth since the inauguration. The problem with that is that we're looking at total employment. We're not looking at how much average wages have grown. And if you know anything about how employment has shifted since inauguration, the vast majority of those jobs have gone to foreign-born individuals, many of whom, probably all of whom, majority, pardon me, are here illegally. So people who are benefiting from this are generally not Americans. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.